summertime.
Right. Well, congratulations. It's finally summer.
Yeah, thank you. It's great relief.
So basically, we're in a test. Once Paloma click the button that says Start Webinar, we will be able to allow people in, and we will see the names of the people joining us. So it's 8 a.m. Let's wait maybe one more minute, and then if not, we will have to start without Mr. Bean. So just know that once she says that the webinar is starting, that's when people can start hearing us.
Okay.
I see someone connected with the name Tech David.
Hi, it's our YouTube team that's streaming.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So just give me the sign and I'll start the webinar, and you're able to see the panelists go up. We are ready. It's already set up for YouTube. Just let me know when to start.
Okay, if everyone is ready, then let's start. It's 8:01. Okay, Paloma, yes, go ahead. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, depending on where you are. It's very nice to welcome you all in this webinar on business integrity trends in Asia Pacific and beyond the COVID-19 crisis. It's my great pleasure to introduce for welcoming remarks Madame Catherine Rylance, Global Head of Anti-Corruption at the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office of the UK. So, Catherine, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Matilda. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here, to be part of this roundtable for Southeast Asia here at the OECD. Corruption risk is increasing, and mitigating it is in the interests of business, of governments, and of the wider economy. Corruption as a barrier to economic growth and prosperity, and its impact on the economy is both at the micro level and the macro level. It drives up the cost of goods all the way down the supply chain. It distorts prices and shrinks the supply of public goods and services. So for this reason, collective action has never been so important. The SME sector in particular has an important role to play as the engine of growth through investment and job creation. And the SME sector is particularly vulnerable in part due to its heterogeneity and also the sheer amount of SMEs that exist. But more countries are introducing innovative legislation to combat bribery. And this includes more countries introducing corporate liability in the Southeast Asian region. In some countries, this takes the form of a failure to prevent bribery offence. And in the UK's experience, this approach has been effective in shifting the burden onto corporates and incentivizing compliance and incentivizing collective action, because collective action is a major part of compliance systems. I look forward to hearing the good practice examples and the various initiatives underway in the region. As always, there are some impressive efforts and real innovation. Thank you, Matilda.
Thank you, Catherine, for your opening remarks and session that is called the Business Integrity Roundtable, along with a discussion held last week as part of the OECD's annual Global Anti-Corruption Integrity Forum. And we will continue this kind of discussion with regional discussions in Africa and in Central and Eastern Europe, among others, in the coming weeks. And if you look at the chat, you can register for these discussions. There is a link that you can use to do so. So we hope that this roundtable will become a regular forum for the exchange of experiences, for the promotion of good practices, and for supporting the implementation of projects that advance business integrity globally, with the support of the OECD partners in the public and in the private sector. So turning to the focus of today's discussion, Southeast Asia is one of the most dynamic regions in the world and a key driver of global growth, as we all know. It attracts almost 1/5 of global FDI inflows, and it is both bolstered by a young, dynamic business sector and an expanding and educated middle class. This is impressive progress, which is connected in no small part to the region's increased commitment to ensuring a level playing field for business. But we see that the global COVID-19 pandemic threatens to undermine this progress and to weaken this commitment also. The toll that the crisis has taken on governments, on markets, on institutions, on people means that we are more exposed to the risks of corruption. And for example, according to a recent OECD UNDP survey on responsible business conduct and anti-corruption compliance in Southeast Asia, we can see that 60% of respondents are concerned with being directly or indirectly associated with COVID-19 related sustainability risks, with corruption being considered the highest risk for companies operating in the region. So today's discussion, we hope, will bring together distinguished leaders from different sectors to discuss their different and innovative anti-corruption initiatives and collective action, to exchange ideas and good practices, and also to consider solutions to the challenges the COVID-19 has brought to the region. So I would like to introduce today's speakers. First, we have Nicolas Bouff, the Policy Advisor for Governance, Human Rights and Access to Justice at the UNDP. We have James Campbell, Partner in Disputes and Investigations, Allen's Law and Australia's Bribery Prevention Network representative. We have Pana Ratanabanangkul, the Project Director of the Thai Private Sector Collective Action Against Corruption, and Nguyen Quang Vinh, that we hope will join us later, General Secretary of the Vietnam Chamber of Commerce and Industry, VCCI. So in the first part of our discussion, I will ask the panelists to present their projects and initiatives and to explain to us what problems they are trying to solve. So I will give the floor first to Nicolas. Nicolas Bouff, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much indeed. Let me just share my screen. See, has that worked? Is my screen shared yet? I need to press share. Exactly. Just give me 1 second. Okay. Okay, everybody. Thank you very much indeed. So let me give you a little whistle-stop tour to our project promoting a fair business environment in ASEAN. And as Catherine said just now, collective action is more important than ever. And I want to start by really emphasizing our partnership and my thanks to our different partners, and a lot of them are here today. Our initiative on promoting a fair business environment in ASEAN is a partnership between ourselves and the Prosperity Fund of the UK government. So that's one key part of the partnership right there. But I'd also like to thank the Thai Coalition Against Corruption and Kumpana, who's actually been a very close collaborator. We work with them on the survey of companies' experience in dealing with corruption in the public sector. I know that Ang Vinh from VCCI is joining us, if he hasn't already. VCCI have been great partners for us in Vietnam on our SME training program, the Business Integrity website, and many others. And of course, last but definitely not least, OECD, who partners with us on many things. We work together on the International Anti-Corruption Conference, this roundtable today, and many other events. And so that really is a demonstration to the point that Catherine just made. We can only work through partnerships. So let me tell you a little bit about FairBiz, which, as it says on the box, is all about promoting a transparent, open, and inclusive business environment in ASEAN countries. The first phase of this initiative started just a little under 3 years ago, and you can see that this first phase is going to end in September, but we are actively at the moment designing the second generation to build on the work we've done so far and to take it to the next stage. And the important innovation about this project from UNDP's perspective is it was really the first one which targeted the private sector as much as the public sector in a multi-stakeholder approach in the 6 ASEAN target countries you can see there. So when you look at the sort of 4 pillars of FairBiz, you can see that in addition to the kind of regional convening and working on the enabling environment with governments on their anti-corruption frameworks and legislation, which it's been common to many of our projects on anti-corruption, we introduced a new emphasis on public procurement, transparency and integrity, which we see as a really important theme, and I'll come back to that later, and working with the private sector on encouraging responsible business practices. So this is what the project looks like. It's really organized around 5 pillars around global supply chains, procurement, ESG investing, youth and entrepreneurship, and diversity and inclusion. So these 5 pillars, these 5 thematic platforms are the vehicles through which we drive our theory of change. So, and key to all of them really is understanding what are the incentives for the private sector to embrace the responsible business and transparency, integrity, and accountability agenda. So the global supply chains focuses on the importance of SMEs in global supply chains, and I think Catherine referred to that as well. And of course, to remain competitive, become more competitive in today's market, they need to embrace transparency and business integrity in order to be attractive to multinational companies or even national large companies. So our platform is really helping them become more competitive, more attractive as part of the supply chain, because they've learned the techniques to be able to have complete transparency and good anti-corruption safeguards. I mentioned procurement. It's a very important pillar of our work, embracing both the public and the private sector and civil society in a multi-stakeholder partnership. It's focused very much on transparency, more data points, helping civil society monitor, and it's achieved great success, for example, in Thailand, where the Thai government acknowledges huge cost savings that have come from bringing greater transparency to infrastructure, and has actually changed its legislation to make some of these voluntary data points legally mandatory, because it's seen the benefit in terms of hundreds of millions of dollars saved for the Thai economy by more transparent infrastructure that's brought the cost of infrastructure down. And in the next generation, we really need to seize on the opportunities from AI, data automation, blockchain, and other new technologies that will really help with the analytics and really help with identifying the flagging the procurements that really are the high-risk ones that need to be given greater scrutiny. We have a pillar on ESG investing, and again, we really want to seize the incentive for companies in ASEAN to become more attractive to the growing importance of the ESG investment sector. So for them to be considered for inclusion in ESG funds by really demonstrating that they are fully transparent. And we see G as the glue of ESG, so to say. So of course, ESG covers environmental and social human rights performance of companies, but the emphasis on transparency, integrity, anti-corruption safeguards is absolutely essential for any company to actually achieve the necessary level of clarity and transparency about its operations, which will be increasingly important in a world which, as we see every day, I'm not going to mention the names, but as we see, ongoing public offerings which may fail because of concern amongst investors and amongst the general public about the integrity in its widest sense of companies. That will be increasingly important, and we are helping companies, listed companies in ASEAN, to raise their game. Youth and entrepreneurship is very important for us because we see a huge appetite from youth startups to understand how they can negotiate their journey with integrity. They understand the importance of, and they need the tools to help them be able to fight corruption and work with integrity. And so our toolkits on the business integrity for young entrepreneurs have been taken up very widely across the region. And of course, we have a strong focus on diversity and inclusion, which really focuses on bringing business integrity to women-led enterprises, help train grassroots women business networks, and strengthen women-led businesses to address the exposure to corruption. That's our big, complex, and very active and exciting project in a nutshell, but of course I'll be happy to talk more about it later or answer any questions. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Nicola. It's a very a large project which tackles on all the different mechanisms that could, incentivize companies to behave with more integrity. It's quite interesting to see how you do the links with topics like diversity, ESG investing, etc. That's very, I think, telling about how these topics are linked. So now I would like to give the floor to James Campbell. James, you have the floor.
Thanks, Matilda. So, my name's James Campbell. I'm a partner at the law firm Allens, and I'm very pleased to also be a member of the steering committee of the Bribery Prevention Network, which I'll call the BPN as we go through this short outline of what that is. A key feature of the BPN is that it is a collaboration. It's a public-private partnership that brings together business, civil society and government with a shared goal of supporting Australian businesses to prevent, to detect and to address bribery and to promote a culture of compliance. The initial impetus for the project really came or originated with the OECD Anti-Bribery Convention reports into Australia's implementation of the Anti-Bribery Convention. And amongst a host of other things that were mentioned in those reports, two key things that were articulated were that Australia's many small and medium enterprises were just not prepared for the bribery risks that they faced when they were operating offshore. And secondly, that there was more that could be done to provide guidance for businesses and in particular for small and medium enterprises and how they could develop cost-effective risk-based anti-compliance programs. And those issues, I think, also emerged from a more recent study that the OECD has published in relation to bribery risk in the region, which clearly shows, I think, that corruption is recognised as a very pressing risk within the survey. But when you look at how that's implemented between large and small businesses, there's quite a radical drop-off in the basic anti-compliance measures as you go down into smaller businesses. So the network is really born as a collaboration between the government, private sector and civil society to bridge those two particular gaps. And that element of collaboration, I think, brings an interesting development of an interesting matrix of interests and capabilities to the project. So, of course, government has an interest in meeting its obligations under international conventions and reducing corruption, and has obviously enormous capabilities in terms of authoritative guidance, credibility and ultimately enforcement. But I think implicitly the OECD reports recognise that there are limits to what the government could achieve acting on its own. Civil society is an important part of the paradigm, so it brings its policy and social interests to addressing bribery and corruption, and has really rich capabilities in terms of knowledge of global anti-bribery and corruption resources and networks of expertise. The private sector bodies that have entered into this arrangement, obviously they've got their own interests in mitigating their own bribery risks. And I'll come to this a little bit later, but in Australia, we are having a failure to prevent bribery offence introduced shortly. And so that's a particularly acute consideration at the moment. But the corporates also have wider interests in facilitating fair and competitive markets and contributing to the communities in which they operate. And the corporates actually have a really important role in, I think, in some unique capabilities in being able to uplift standards through their really extensive supply chains. So that's an important aspect of what they bring to the network. Our expectation and our experience to date has been that there has been real strength and real reach in that collaborative approach. And I think it's also emphasised that there is a genuine alignment of interests in reducing bribery and corruption between those three types of bodies. Now, what is the Bribery Prevention Network? Well, we view it as being a very long-term project where we've successfully delivered the first phase. I'll put the first phase up onto the screen now, if I can manage my technology. So the first phase of the Bribery Prevention Network is a web-based portal that provides free, relevant, reliable resources to prevent, detect and address bribery and corruption. You can see that that's the architecture that informs the structure of the site. And this was selected as the first step because it was perceived to meet a real need within the Australian anti-bribery compliance community. As many of the listeners will know, there's an enormous wealth of high quality anti-bribery resources globally, but they can be disparate, they can be hard to find, and especially they can be quite hard for a novice to assess their credibility and their relevance to a small or medium enterprise operating in Australia. So what the phase one of the project delivers is this online portal that offers a curated set of high quality resources. The actual resources are third-party resources. They're already in existence and we're effectively linking to them. But the value proposition is that they've been selected by anti-bribery experts and so that they are made available in this sort of convenient way. So this is meant to be really the first step in cutting through complexity for small and medium enterprises. We're now embarking on what we're calling phase 1A, which is about building engagement with small and medium enterprises about this resource and about anti-bribery and corruption issues more broadly. And we envisage that having this portal to anchor that engagement will be really important to making it effective. I think we really have two objectives in undertaking this project of engagement. The first one is about persuasion. It's about winning hearts and minds and persuading and educating about anti-bribery and corruption issues and promoting a culture of compliance. The second, though, is also about listening and learning from small and medium enterprises about what will drive their behaviours and what they will find of interest and of value in actually uplifting their compliance regimes. And the idea is that that will drive sort of a cycle of improvement in this site so that we can make it more tailored, more dynamic and more user-driven. So I'd like to acknowledge the important contributions that have been made by the Australian Federal Police, the Attorney General's Department, Commonwealth Banks, Westpac, KPMG, Transparency International, the Minerals Council of Australia, GCNA and AME, who've all been critical to bringing this project to fruition. We now have a good platform to bridge the gap that was articulated by the OECD. And I hope that when the next OECD reports are brought out, that they'll be recording the inroads that have been made by this project and others in building awareness and capability in ABC risk management amongst Australia's SMEs.
Thank you very much, James. I think it's a super interesting challenge that most countries, even the ones that are most advanced in enforcing the anti-bribery convention of the OECD, most countries are having this challenge with SMEs. It's much more difficult for SMEs to really be proactive in fighting corruption and trying to build a culture of integrity. So it's quite an excellent example that what you're doing on that. And now I would like to give the floor to Panna Ratanabanankoon from the Thai private sector collective action against corruption to present your project. Panna, you have the floor. Panna, he looks frozen. So let me take this opportunity to welcome Mr. Nguyen Quang Vinh, the General Secretary of the Vietnam Chamber of Commerce and Industry, who has joined us. Very much welcome. And Panna is trying to reach. Are you with us? Yes, you're with us, Panna. So please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. And glad to be in this panel. My name is Panna Ratanabanankoon. I'm the project director for the Thai CAC. The Thai CAC is a nonprofit led platform for private companies to come and join and promote transparency over all industries. And let me tell you a little bit about who we are and what we've done so far. So the CAC full name is a Thai Private Sector Collective Action Against Corruption. We have a staff of only 5, and we look after many member companies, as I will tell you more about. But let me start with telling you a story. This is a company that joined CAC several years ago, and I can't reveal the name, but I can tell you that this company is involved in manufacturing automotive parts. So they buy cold rolled steel plates and then manufactured automotive parts, whether it's doors and hoods or boots or roof, and then they sell it to the car factories. And through our process of working with them, we were able to help them develop internal controls that help mitigate corruption. Now, first thing that they have to do is they have to assess the corruption risk for the business. And of course, when you have a factory, you have products that you need to transport. The first risk is the transportation risk, being extorted for bribes, being stopped along the way to delivery, and extorted for bribes. And this is what happened here, is that in their factory, in front of their factory, because in the morning they have trucks delivering the goods, there's an unwelcoming party that visits them in the morning and try to extort them for bribe because there's so many trucks parked alongside the road. The other problem they have is that once these trucks pick up the products and go out to deliver to the automotive plants, because of the heavy nature of the parts, they're often stopped along the way and try to being extorted for bribes as well, whether their trucks being overweighted or something wrong with their drivers. So what they did is they had implemented an internal control in place to mitigate this. And I must say that in a very typical business nature in Thailand, when you're facing with bribery, risk, or extortion, the first thing that comes to mind is not necessarily about developing internal controls. It might be about trying to find the right connection and negotiate that bribe, or maybe finding the right amount to pay for the bribe so that you're not being harassed on a daily or monthly basis, which is what we tell our members, that is a very short-sighted and very temporary solution to this problem, because the bribery doesn't end there. If you have connection, maybe next year you need to find another one. So what they did here is that through their process, they put together a system in place to, first of all, clear the trucks out of the front of the factory. They had implemented an application where all the drivers can know over the phone when they're supposed to be in front of the factory, and one by one they can come, and the rest can wait at the gas station or rest stop while their time is up. So the other thing that they do is that in making sure that their trucks are operating within the legal aspects, their drivers, before they come into the factory, are checked for alcohol level. They're wearing the blood pressure monitor on the wrist, and they're also being measured for temperature as well. And the purpose of this is to make sure that the driver is as ready and capable as possible before they go out and do business for the company. If their trucks get involved in accidents, well, the damage may be to the public and as well as the product and the company's asset is also. And before the truck can leave the factory, they also have implemented a checklist where they go over the cargo weight, the lights around the truck, the GPS system in the truck, all the paperwork, such that if they're stopped during the way, there's nothing that the officials can use to extort the bribes from them. And through this, they've told me that once they implemented this system, the bribes in front of the factories have gone away. Actually, the air quality in the factory have gone up because previously they have these big trucks idling all over the factory waiting to offload their products or pick up their products. They can utilize the space in their factory better. And lastly, the extortion along the way when they deliver the products have more or less gone away because no fault can be found with their trucks. So these kind of measures and controls, although requires time and resources to implement, is a sustainable way of dealing with the bribery issue here in Thailand. So what we're trying to do is we are trying to gather more members that will come together and develop these type of system in their companies. And that's sort of the underlying concept of our collective action, is that we want the large corporation, the listed companies to lead the way. And then we also want their supply chain to join as well, because if a large corporation is clean by themselves, but the supply chain is not clean, then it's not transparent, it's not full transparency. And ultimately, we'd like to promote these products and services of these companies to the customer. So our collective action is a three-part process where we get the large companies on board first, the SMEs who are the supply chain of the large companies, and then ultimately the customers. To date, we've been able to secure about 472 certified members over 10 years. It hasn't been easy. We started with only a dozen or so in the banking sector and insurance, but to date we have 472, and about 25 of these are SMEs. And we also have over 1,000 companies that have signed a declaration to join CAC, and about 100 of these are SMEs as well. We've been asked to share our experience with neighboring countries and share knowledge with them as well. We also have two, what we call certification platforms, and this is taken from the adapted from the Transparency International checklist. So we condensed it down to 71 checklists for the large companies and 17 checklists for the SMEs. Both of these checklists are on our website, and they're in English as well if you're interested. But we offer certification based on these two guidelines. And once the companies receive certification, they have to renew the certification every 3 years. More recently, we've engaged these large companies that have been certified with us on what we call our Change Agent project or award. Change Agent means that once they're certified with us, instead of getting to see them 3 years from now, what we'd like to do is during this 3 years, they need to go to the supply chain and try to recruit their top suppliers into the SME programs. And why we don't do this ourselves is because it takes a lot of effort to try to attract every single SMEs. So this Change Agent project helps us recruit the SMEs without spending too much time on the companies themselves. The other benefit is that for the SMEs, it's especially challenging in terms of resources and time and effort to get their internal controls in place. So they need to have certain incentives. And where does these incentives come from? Well, it's the large companies that they sell the products and services to. So all these companies at the bottom, once they join us as a change agent, what we require from them is to offer, tangible, maybe small, but tangible benefits to these SMEs who become certified with us. Maybe bonus points when they bid for jobs, or they pay for the cost for the certification, and all of them do sort of offer different benefits. But unfortunately, our efforts have, as we see in the CPI of Thailand, have not really changed the course of the ranking. And that's quite unfortunate despite our success. And in our opinion, humble opinion, is that we need to emphasize on building a good ecosystem here in Thailand. So how do you get as much private sector involved, as many private sector involved as possible, as many citizens on board in our efforts as possible, is that we need to build an ecosystem where there's a platform for them to come and join. We already have two. CAC, that's me, is involved in the private sector. We have another platform called Anti-Corruption Thailand, ACT, that looks after the citizens. And together we work with UNDP as well as ADB so that we help promote all stakeholders to become on board. And what we'd like to do is push the agenda to the anti-corruption agencies in Thailand. There's 2 of them, so that they enforce and help improve the government service sector. So we share with them the pain points of the public and private sector. They in turn take these pain points and try to improve the services, reduce discretion, simplify legislation, prosecute only any wrongdoers, and at the same time handle the whistleblowing information in a very efficient basis. So if you can make this ecosystem happen, then I think you have more private sector that would be interested in joining. You have more citizen that has faith in the anti-corruption efforts. And all this does is to enlarge this ecosystem even more. So to end my introduction, thank you again. We are a small collective action in terms of staff, but we do have quite a number of membership. So we're interested in having conversation about sharing experiences and knowledge, and also funding support if you are interested. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pana. It's quite an amazing project that you're working on, the collective action. And I think there are many points that are super interesting in terms of examples, like working on the whole supply chain, using the big ones to work with the small ones, and also all your consideration of the ecosystem at the end. I think that's what is very challenging to like work on the whole ecosystem to ensure that all the actors move in the right direction, and that might change at the end the corruption perception for Thailand. But first, now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Vin and to talk about the Business Integrity Toolkit in Vietnam and the Vietnam Business Council for Sustainable Development. Mr. Vin, you have the floor.
Thank you for inviting me. And first of all, I would like to say to apologize for coming late because of the misunderstanding about the date of the start of the conference. To me, it's very important, event today when we organize and the business integrity trends in Asia Pacific beyond the COVID-19 crisis. And that also good for BCCI as a private sector representative, the voice of the private sector in Vietnam to be part of this event. And I think that I want to share with you that BCCI has been involving in anti-corruption, in mobilizing private sector effort to fight against corruption from my experience since the year 2008. So we have 13 years of work experience in just very, very, very difficult journey. And I still remember the day when we initiated the integrity and transparency in business initiative in the year 2008. That also, kind of multi-stakeholder partnership or collective action, if you like. We tried to work with British Embassy, and British Embassy at that time was a great supporter with Swedish Embassy, Transparency International, and a number of NGO and corporate partners to raise the issue, to raise the role of the private sector in fighting against corruption. And luckily, we got very strong support from the government at that time. So ITBI, we've gone integrity and transparency in business initiative was our first initiative where we try to have collective action from different key stakeholders in the society to address the issue. And recently we have project number 12. We call enhancing integrity and transparency in integrity initiative in business. And with that, we have a lot of key participation from our key partner, like, we have continuation of support from the British Embassy. We have very active participation and support from UNDP. And we still have, the growing number of businesses which are the member of BCCI to be a part of the project. So I can share with you that we started from the year 2008. I see very few, businesses committed to integrity and transparency. But now, if we look around, you look at the agenda of the private sector, businesses and business association in Vietnam, I think a lot of has been approved in terms of awareness, in terms of capacity building, and more importantly, the private sector in Vietnam, the businesses, the member of BCCI and the member of Vietnam Business Council for Sustainable Development has been put the anti-corruption and very high in the agenda, especially when they put the SDG, the Agenda 2030 of the United Nations, in the heart of the business. And I still remember when we welcomed the ex-Prime Minister of the UK to come to visit Vietnam, and our Prime Minister and the Prime Minister of the UK, we chaired the workshop organized by BCCI with the theme that to place the integrity and transparency in the heart of the business. So that a lot of improvement, we have been sharing the experiences with our ASEAN country. But, I want to share with you that, the over 20% of, SME survey has been asked to pay the bribery very frequently or frequently. So that also, concerned with the later question when I have to answer why, we want to, why the business sector, why the private sector, we want to mobilize and to emphasize the role of the private sector in Vietnam in teaming up with the government and agency to address the issue. And like, our colleagues from Thai share that we work in Vietnam, we work very closely with the government and agency like Government Inspectorate. We work with different, academic researching body to conduct a lot of our activity. And one of the important of activity of the objective of the project is helping SMEs in Vietnam to resist corruption in Vietnam. So that the project has been, funded by a British government, by a prosperity fund, and starting June 2016, and we have a lot of we got a lot of success, and we had been able to work with IBNF Global to introduce the Toolkit for SMEs in Vietnam, and that the online Toolkit. So it's quite easy for the company in Vietnam to use the Toolkit, so that they can not only raise the awareness of the thing, but also they have a tool to deal with the bribery problem in Vietnam. So in the year 2016, in collaboration with IBNF Global, and we introduced and we put the helping SME to resist corruption in Vietnam into operation. And we organize a lot of training courses, and more than 1,100 SME in different locality and provinces of Vietnam has been involved, has been trained or involved in our training courses. So I think that a lot of activity about researching, about introducing the toolkit, apart from the publish the manual for the company, for SME to use the toolkit, and we also organize the benchmarking of the top sustainable company in Vietnam every year. It is the 6th year we are organizing such kind of benchmarking using our corporate sustainability index. And in our indexes, we call CSI, we also put the content of anti-corruption into the indexes. So the company can measure in general corporate sustainability, and in general and in particular the level they are in the good place to deal with or to fight against corruption. That also our one of the key activity that attract a lot of businesses in Vietnam to participate in our activity. So that is I want to conclude that I want to share with you that partnership, multi-stakeholder partnership, collective action is very important. So that's why we work with all key stakeholders here like UNDP, British Embassy, government inspectorate, and more partners to establish the government, private sector integrity initiative with the aim to mobilize, and to emphasize the role of the key stakeholder in society at large to fight against corruption, especially the corruption in business, in business in the private sector. So that is the ongoing of VCCI over the last 12 years, and we continue to work with UNDP and other partners to continue the agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Another example of collective action to somehow try to tackle the whole ecosystem, that favors corruption. So I think we have done a round of presentation of all these initiatives, project, collective action that are all, each of them very amazing, but you are all tackling with the same challenges. And now I would like to go to the specific context we are in with the COVID-19 crisis, and to see how your projects are adapting to this specific context. So I will maybe begin by Pana asking you how your different initiatives and collective action, have adapted to this crisis since last year, and also maybe take the opportunity to cover one part of the question that was asked in the chat by Nicola Bonucci about how do you also tackle both, like the question of need for integrity in the private sector, but also in the public sector, because the question of solicitation is really maybe why you are not progressing so much in the CPI index. So could you tell us how you have adapted, adjusted, face the challenge of the pandemic crisis? Pana.
Okay, thank you. So the first part of your question is that the COVID crisis has not been easy on us as well. We've seen companies that have shifted into survival mode rather than looking into compliance and transparency as a priority. And what we try to advise them is that really during the COVID pandemic is where you may see the highest fraud and corruption risk. Why do I say that? Let's just focus on corruption. If you're a government official and you have steady income of bribery coming in from all sorts of public-private transaction, well, those transactions have dramatically reduced. Less construction projects, less permits to issue, but at the same time, if you're that official, you still have the regular expense of whatever you pay for on a normal basis. Well, that means that with the lower number of companies coming in to transact with you, the bribery risk may be increasing. And in other words, you may be risking being extorted because of the need from the official. And secondly, we have shifted in terms of our approval process, right? Previously, we have all the companies may have formal, rigid approval process that has gone through committees and eyes and ears of many people. Well, when we work from home, all these processes have changed. A lot of them are e-approvals, online approvals, and there's no record keeping as before. And so this is a reason, second reason why the risk could be higher. The third reason is that the expeditious nature of all the decision, right? We need to adapt, we need to change, we need to innovate for this COVID crisis, puts a lot of pressure on the people making these decisions. So before, you may have several months, weeks to digest the opportunities, to digest the strategy or the battle the crisis. But now you have to make that decision within days, maybe hours. So the nature of this expeditious timeline creates a higher risk as well. So what we try to do is we try to tell them these three factors is the reason why you have to pay more attention to transparency and corruption rather than put it down your list of priorities. The second change for us is that we have 4 training courses that we conduct. All those have to be shifted almost immediately to online, and that represents quite a challenge, going from classrooms to online in terms of technical and the content and even the facilitator themselves. That's the second challenge. And the third challenge would be for the SMEs. If you think the SMEs are hard to attract into talk about
and now we are losing you.
Anti-bribery, corruption, survival.
Yeah.
Okay,
we have lost you for a minute, maybe. So if you could just repeat what you just said.
Okay, so I was going to mention about the SMEs.
Yes.
Yeah, I was going to mention the SMEs that if you think it was hard before, now it's really hard because they're in a survival mode. And for instance, we tried calling up the SMEs and half of them don't even pick up the phone. Maybe they're working from home or maybe they close their business and factories. So I think this represents a challenge for all of us during this part to get the SMEs on board. That's why having large companies as change agent matters, because they can offer the right incentives and benefits to these SMEs. And if the public sector can do that, that's great, but that takes time as well. And the second question from Nicholas is, can you repeat the question again?
It's more
please?
like, how do you ensure that you tackle both the private and the public issue,
yes.
to reduce solicitation?
Yes, so we've tried to introduce ourselves as the risk holder in terms of all the public government transactions. So as part of the certification process, the 450 plus companies that have certified with us have to disclose what risk they have in doing their business, whether it's getting permits, licensing, or just getting simple transaction or bidding for new jobs. So we have an incredible amount of database of data on which sector, which government office is prone to bribery, which service of that office is prone to bribery, and how is the bribery being changed hands. And this information, although we anonymize it, is a very valuable information in fighting corruption, because if the public sector doesn't know which service is vulnerable, then obviously they can't fix it. Or they don't know which part of legislation or rules are allowing a lot of or too much discretion, then they can't fix that. So that's the first role, is that we try to be the solution provider in sharing the pain points and the data with the public sector. The second thing that we do is that we try to promote a very dynamic and efficient whistleblowing process. We view the whistleblowing system as an alarm, as a burglar alarm for our houses. If you don't have that system working, then you can't tell where the risk is and you can't fix and mitigate the problem. Same with the public sector in Thailand. Each of the offices have their own whistleblowing channel, have their own method of analyzing the data, have their own ways of reporting it. And that doesn't give you the landscape of where the problem lies. So We have worked on a project 2 years ago to show a pilot project with OPDC here, the Office of Private Development, what the right whistleblowing channel could be. And that proved to be very useful in getting the data that we want. And the third thing, which I'll talk about quickly, is that we try to give examples on how the government sector, the public sector, can build transparency culture in their working, because the transparency culture doesn't happen overnight. It's not easy to build, but the private sector have done a lot, whether it's trying to get people to be more aware about transparency, ethics, or even safety in like energy companies. And those success factors or success stories could be useful to the public sector as well in building a culture of transparency. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pana. It's quite an amazing amount of activities that you have to tackle both the private sector issue, but also the public sector issue. And you put on the table new topics like protection of whistleblower, which is quite important to progress anywhere in the private and in the public sector. Now, I would like to go back to Mr. Vin and ask you, what are the new corruption and integrity risks in the region because of the COVID-19 crisis? I mean, Pana, you gave us a lot of very good examples, but I would like to give you the floor. But before, maybe I will launch a poll to the audience, and I will encourage the audience to answer this poll, is to ask you, do you think that the corruption risks in the region have increased during the COVID-19 crisis? I think the answer is a little bit obvious, but let's still have this poll to somehow back up our discussions. And so while you answer, I'll give the floor to Mr. Vin to get your views on the increase or not of integrity risks during the crisis. Mr. Vin, you have the floor.
Thank you for the question. I think that in Vietnam we are sharing a lot of the same difficulty with Thailand, and because of the COVID-19, so a lot of businesses, has been put in the risk of to be or not to be. So the compliances, anti-corruption effort is not the first priority. And the risk of involving, mobilizing more and more companies, especially small and medium-sized, even macro-sized enterprises, and that we set in the plan, has some difficulty. And taking, for example, we did try to work with some state-owned enterprises in Vietnam and to sign the MOU with them, to work with them, to help them to improve the internal compliance system and to organize a lot of training courses and coaching for them. But because of the COVID, so everything changed. So we the company, they have a lot of reason, but we know that, their main concern, is COVID-19, how to deal with the COVID-19 first, and then, at the same time working with VCCI on the issue. So that the risk that, the company is more difficult to mobilize, more participation, more active participation from the private sector, especially the small and medium-sized enterprises to participate in our training and different, kind of activity, coaching, and helping them to deal with the to build up the code of conduct, for example, or the internal compliance system within the company. So that. And the second week is that traditionally we organize the training courses on spot, like not online, offline. And you may know that the facility, the technical facility, the internet in Vietnam, at some place, some provinces is not so well. So we also change to our online, organizing the online training courses. But also we also meet a lot of difficult in organizing the online training courses and online conferences. But luckily, Vietnam managed the situation of COVID-19 quite well. So we get used to, kind of hybrid, model. We are still allowed to invite a number of representative of training to the studio, but at the same time we also ask businesses to participate online, so that the hybrid model of organizing events, workshop or training courses will be our key tool of delivering our project. So the activity of our program. So that also the risk, and that all for me about the new risk and because of the COVID-19. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Vin. I don't know if we can see already the results of the poll. I don't know, the team, if you could project the results so that it will. Okay, that's quite clear. Quite clear. Corruption risk have increased significantly with the crisis, the COVID-19 crisis. Pana has very well explained why it is the case. Also, what are the mechanisms that, or the specific aspect of the crisis that give rise to this increase. So with this background, we can continue the discussion. And with James, maybe could you tell us, how can we help business in the region to detect and to reduce those specific risks that have risen with the crisis?
Thanks very much, Matilda. Yeah, so, I guess the first step to helping business to detect and address risks is really to recognise that there is risk, particularly around anti-bribery or around bribery and corruption. And I was actually quite encouraged by the results of the OECD survey, which found that there did seem to be at least reasonably strong awareness that there was risk in the region. I'm not sure that there would be such a strong awareness amongst Australia's small and medium enterprises as to the risks of operating offshore. So obviously, having got over the challenge of recognising that there are risks, the real challenge, and I think this is a particularly acute challenge in the current pandemic, is getting businesses over the hump of actually doing something to understand those risks better and to act on them. Pana's already touched on some of the ways in which the pandemic has made that challenging, that call to action challenging. But fundamentally, it has meant that there are more acute risks, and particularly, I think, for businesses that are, don't have the capacity, the resources to cope with the rate of change. They just don't have the bandwidth, the energy, or the money to devote to implementing anti-bribery compliance when they're really struggling to survive in the current environment. So it is a challenging environment to facilitate change. And with that in mind, really anything that can help companies to on that journey is valuable. I understand that the OECD is doing some work on facilitating a risk assessment tool, which I think will be very valuable. We'll look forward to seeing that as it's launched. Obviously, our organisation and some of the others that we have heard from today are working to facilitate access to the tools that will help companies to implement an effective anti-bribery measure. And I think there are really two aspects to those efforts, both in risk assessment and access to tools. The first one is a persuasive role, persuading companies that there is a risk and persuading companies that that risk is present for them. It's not just something that's on the horizon. And secondly, also to direct the action that needs to be taken so that it can be taken in a targeted and an efficient way. The other thing that I'd like to touch on is the role that big businesses have in facilitating the standards of compliance throughout their supply chain. This is a theme that's come up a few times today. And it's a theme that's particularly prominent in Australia, as I mentioned, because we had some incoming changes to legislation to introduce a failure to prevent bribery offence. So it's meaning that a lot of companies are really considering actively what it is that they need to do in order to mitigate the risks within their supply chain. So, I mean, in talking to companies that are thinking this through at the moment, there are obviously a range of tools that are available. There's fairly standard tools around the contractual warranties and mechanisms that can be put in place, you know, anti-bribery compliance assurances, and then you can really see that stepped out into quite a granular level in terms of requiring anti-bribery training, setting out the elements of an anti-bribery. You know, sometimes these things can go so far as really to set out the charter for an anti-bribery compliance program. So, you know, in some circumstances, you see that level of contractual requirement around anti-bribery compliance. So that really creates, I guess, a cost for people who want to work with larger companies, that they've got to meet those minimum standards. We're also seeing, I think, some larger companies think a little bit more creatively than that in terms of how they can actually help their supply chains to meet to uplift their compliance. So, I mean, just two examples that I've had discussions about recently are the role in which that anti-bribery compliance can play as a KPI in a tender process. So there's actually a competitive advantage that a smaller company will have if it has an effective anti-bribery compliance program. And obviously that's switching the narrative from being, you know, this is a cost to this is an opportunity. And that's an important, you know, switch in, I think, perception. And we're also seeing some other companies, particularly companies that, you know, have extensive operations in higher risk jurisdictions, that are really taking it on themselves to proactively work with suppliers to do the training, to help them build up the programs and the assurances. So, you know, they're treating that, I think, really as something that they need to do in order to build up the kind of supply chain that they can comfortably use with the incoming legislation. So I think that there is an important and growing role for businesses, and I think there's room for some really deep thought about how it is that businesses go about uplifting standards. Thank you.
Thank you, James. And yes, it reminds us of this slide from Pana with the fishes, you know, like the big one, corruption, then you have the medium-sized fishes, like the big companies that need to train the smaller one behind them, you know. So that's, I think it's a very striking slide, and that tells a lot. But before we go to the last panelist, Nicola, you introduced also, James, this issue of how to help small companies to identify the corruption risks. And that's the perfect introduction to what we would like to just take a few minutes to present to you. It's our new self-evaluation tool for corruption risk assessment processes that we have designed specifically for these small and medium-sized enterprises. And the idea is to identify areas of potential improvement in established corruption risk assessment processes. So it has been produced following the response obtained in the OECD survey launched last year. And so I will let my colleague, Sofia Tirini, anti-corruption analyst of our anti-corruption division, to present to you the tool in more detail. So Sofia, if you could join us, that's the beauty of having virtual meetings, you know.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you, Matilde, and all the speakers for this space to talk about the self-evaluation tool that the OECD is launching as part of our Caac project funded by the UK government. I hope you can all see on the screen the website with the self-evaluation tool. I think you do. Before anything, I'd like to thank all the internal and external partners and stakeholders who have contributed to this tool. We have done a full consultation with experts in the field from different sectors, countries, and organizations. And thanks to them, we have achieved this final version that we hope will help SMEs operating in Asia Pacific and beyond with our corruption risk assessment processes. The tool is now in English, but will be translated also into Thai, Vietnamese, Bahasa Indonesia, and Bahasa Malaysia as well. As Matilde mentioned before, this tool has been produced following the responses obtained in our regional survey launched last year, where respondents indicated that corruption risk assessment is the key area to develop. And after the poll that we have just launched a few minutes ago, we can all agree that this is indeed a key area more than ever. Assessment of corruption risk is fundamental to mitigating disruptions to the achievement of financial and non-financial objectives and for ensuring that corruption-related controls are fit for purpose. Furthermore, it is another factor that law enforcement authorities evaluate when assessing a company's compliance program. This is why this topic is so important as well. This tool is designed sufficiently broad such that it accounts for the diversity of SMEs, which may vary considerably in their characteristics, and that the proposed tool has the adequate length and complexity that it doesn't require large amounts of time and human resources, which is very important from the viewpoint of SMEs, of course. This tool is intended for SMEs that already have anti-bribery or anti-corruption compliance programs based on previous corruption risk assessments of their businesses. With this tool, we are not intending to help companies to build their corruption risk assessment processing from scratch, but to help them identify any weaknesses of their assessment processes and to understand its level of maturity of their assessment methodology in order to improve them. This will allow companies to better invest their resources while improving their procedures, to develop a culture of integrity while reducing cost and time, and most importantly, the corruption. At the end of this webpage, you will, with all the necessary explanations about the self-evaluation tool, the users will find a button to access the questionnaire. There you can see start your test. And there's where they will assess the level of maturity of their corruption risk assessment processes. Questionnaire, as you can see, consists of only 12 questions, so it's very short, that the users will have to answer, and at the end they will obtain 4 possible results: nascent, emerging, established, or leading. Following those results, the user will have access to a list of international standards used to build this tool, and a list of very useful reports, guidelines, and documents that will help SMEs improve their corruption risk assessment process. Finally, the self-evaluation tool for companies doesn't constitute any kind of certification of corruption risk assessment processes, nor does it attest as to whether a company meets any applicable national legal requirements. This tool is designed to help select elements of their company's corruption risk assessment processes compares to common international practices, and is not intended to be a formal performance analysis tool, of course. We will leave on the chat the link for the tool, and we invite all the SMEs who would like to assess their corruption risk assessment processes to use this tool and read the information provided there. I hope they will find it useful, and thank you very much for these minutes to launch officially our tool. Thank you.
Thank you, Sofia. I think it would be very useful for SMEs in the region and elsewhere, actually, yes, the first step is to realize what is your problem and to know a little bit more about your problem. So it's very useful. And now I will go back to the panelists and to you, Nicolas. And could you tell us what do you envisage for the anti-corruption movement in Asia Pacific for this year to come?
Thanks very much. So, of course, I completely agree with everything that the speaker said about the way that COVID has deepened and exacerbated corruption risks. And of course, that will shape things in 2021. But I think that there are 4 very important positive trends that we need to look at. The first is that there is increasing and strong public anger and demand to address corruption. So yes, it's true that in COVID, there's been many scandals around health procurement, many emergency procurements, and less transparency. But they've been very much commented on, and there's a lot of anger about them. And I've seen a number of governments overthrown in this region because of corruption, and I don't expect that trend will lessen at all. At the same time, as I mentioned before, the second trend is that there's a clearly higher expectation from corporations. The ESG movement is getting stronger. Investors are paying more attention to it. ESG investing is a bigger topic. As I've mentioned, MSMEs will be expected to demonstrate high levels of anti-corruption compliance and safeguards in order to be part of the supply chain. So more is expected of companies in this region and will be expected of them. And that will be important because in this time, where they need to recover and where the competition during the recovery is very sharp, this is an important competitive edge that they'll have to have. And I also see that ESG, which of course is well known for its green and human rights side, there's a growing understanding that the G of ESG is not just about corporate governance, but it's about integrity and strong internal anti-corruption safeguards too. The third trend linked to that is I see a real understanding of the role of responsible business in the COVID recovery. And I think the most striking example of that was that the ASEAN Comprehensive COVID Recovery Strategy has a whole section devoted to responsible business. And it's the first time I've seen that in an ASEAN policy document. And ASEAN Secretary has contacted UNDP to talk about ESG. So these are new developments. There's a much greater growing awareness of why the COVID recovery in our region needs responsible business at its core. And the fourth trend, I mean, Catherine already mentioned the stronger legal framework, and that will continue. But equally, the technological developments are really going to make the detection of corruption and the engagement of civil society and media in the oversight of new techniques around transparency all the easier. So the technological means are going to be there, and I think the political will is going to be there from governments, from the private sector, and from people. Thanks.
Thank you, Nicholas. That's good reasons to be optimistic, and that's a good feeling in these days. It's like, yeah, we have, I think, really like fundamental trends that are here that should help us, tackle this challenge of corruption. You mentioned, of course, the public opinion, is much. You mentioned also the pressure from investors that is definitely growing on these topics. You mentioned the digital trends that make the solutions maybe more easy or more affordable. And last but not least, this general idea of responsible business conduct that is definitely growing, and the expectations from clients, from suppliers, from investors, from the general public, etc. It's clearly that business behave responsibly. So that's a very good point. You link the corruption integrity agenda to the broader responsible business conduct agenda. And that's what we are doing also in our work in Asia and elsewhere at the OECD. So now we are reaching the third round of our questions. We have been a little bit too long on the first one, presentation of your projects, but for good reasons, because these projects are super interesting and fascinating. So I will ask you to be short in your answer to the next question, which is, somehow Nicolas began to answer this. What does the future look like? And in your views, how can integrity and the values of companies ensure a better transition to this new normal that everybody is talking about? We all say we need to build back better. So what is the role of integrity in this global and future generations of business people will learn out of this crisis? So I will give each of you maybe 2 minutes or 3 maximum to answer that. So please be short, but give us your ideas about the future. Maybe, I don't know, James, you can begin.
Yes, I'll be very quick. So I just wanted to make 3 points. The first one was that values, culture, integrity, these sort of things are absolutely integral to legal risk. They're not just aspirational norms. In Australia, we've seen some really significant developments over the last few years on that front. We've had a widely followed Financial Services Royal Commission. Regulators, enforcement agencies are thinking deeply about culture as a way to create legal liability. Even 10 years ago, these concepts were sort of considered, I think, perhaps as a little bit more vague and non-legal concepts. But I think there's a really clear vision developing, first of all, amongst senior managers, on boards, about how to create a culture that is, desirable, that actually encourages compliance. And secondly, about how to implement that, how to embed it, how to make it real, And then correspondingly, there's much more engagement and skill amongst regulators of being able to assess that and articulate to courts how it is that a deficient culture has caused the particular legal non-compliance. So that's the first point. The second point is, I think, perhaps a little bit more aspirational. Nicholas has talked a little bit about, ESG as sort of a more broad umbrella for responsible business conduct, and that's right. It is a much broader umbrella. And I think one of the challenges that we face in legal compliance roles is that the regime sitting underneath that can be much more siloed into bribery and corruption sanctions, in sort of modern slavery and so on. They're regulated by different bodies, they're administered by different bodies, and there can be somewhat siloed mindset. So I think there's a real role for convergence around what good looks like in terms of compliance programs across those different silos. So the architecture of a good compliance program is the same, whatever silo you're looking at. It needs to be driven by risk assessment. You need to have governance. You need to have tone from the top, due diligence, and so on. So I think there is a role for some real depth of thought about how the different regimes can kind of be integrated into a more holistic articulation of what good looks like in terms of compliance. And the third point I was going to make briefly was bringing back to my particular project, Bribery Prevention Network, and that I'd love to see in a few years' time that we're articulating for you how we've made some real inroads in terms of communicating and uplifting compliance amongst SMEs within Australia. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. So maybe now, Pana, you have the floor.
Thank you. For me, I'll offer 3 points as well. For our collective action, our first mission is to build a bigger and larger collective group of private companies. Now, at some point in time, if you're looking to build collective action, you're going to face the challenge of attracting companies that don't really have the incentive to join, or they can't change the way they do business to become clean. And so how do we overcome this? And we're sort of in that phase now, is that we need to find incentives for companies to join, whether it's through the public sector offering benefits or some tangible benefits from the private sector themselves. So go back to the ecosystem that we have to build. It's not only in Thailand that we have to build this ecosystem, but let's say if this ecosystem is global, and if countries demand to see anti-corruption certification from companies exporting or importing products into their countries, well, that creates an incentives for the companies in each countries to become certified and to upgrade their internal system. The second is the challenge is that once you have a collective action, you have companies that have been certified, that have good internal system. Are they really here for the certification, or are they using the transparency and the compliance system for their everyday business? And this will be the second challenge that you have. We have companies that are here just for certification, but a large number of them really want to have a fully transparent system and do away with bribery risk. So how do you promote that they need to breathe in and out in terms of anti-corruption and transparency? It's not easy, but I think that if all the public and private sector join hands and create this expectation and culture that you need to do this in your daily business operations, I think that helps. And the third aspect is that everybody that comes and join your collective action, ultimately they want to know, will they face less corruption in their business? Will I step into this government office and get extorted for bribes again? So this is about creating change with the public sector. And I mentioned to you that, if you want to fix a problem, you go ask the person who's experiencing the problem, right? And they can even tell you what's wrong, but more than that, they can even tell you how to fix it. So this is what the value of collective action can offer as well, is that, you know, with the 400 companies, we know where the problem lies, and we know possible solutions to mitigate some of those problems. So we need the public agency to listen and hear us and work with us. And last but not least, I think that what's constantly in the back of our minds is also funding. You know, we have a self-sustaining funding, but it's not a very stable funding year on year. So if any large organization is interested in any sharing experience or knowledge transfer, you know, having some funding for the collective action goes a long way in sustainable activity. So thank you.
Thank you, Pana. Now I will give the floor to Mr. Ving, and you have really 2 minutes, because we need to have 2 minutes for Nicolas, and we'll just wrap up in 1 minute. Mr. Ving, you have the floor.
Thank you. I have 2 points to share, you know, about the future. The future is that, you know, we need uncertainty to deal with the uncertainty. On the new normal, we are talking about a lot. But, you know, to VCCI as a representative of the private sector in Vietnam, we are representing more than 100,000 members. We will continue to put the agenda on anti-corruption high in the business agenda, and we continue to mobilize the businesses in Vietnam to engage and to participate actively in our agenda. That the agenda has been, you know, agreed between VCCI, UNDP, and, you know, IBF Global, British Embassy, and other, you know, corporate partners, so that in terms of, you know, communication, awareness raising, activity, capacity building, and, you know, research. And we don't want to use the collective action, but actually it's a collective action we used to use in the past. But now we are trying to, you know, promote our own what we call, you know, government business integrity initiative or alliance, if you like. So that's all about that we are going to put it. It's also in line with the law on anti-corruption in Vietnam that we are working actively with the government inspectorate to revise it. And second point that we, as I mentioned earlier, that we are organizing the benchmarking of the top sustainable company in Vietnam using our indexes. And we are thinking about the sub-award, you know, to be given to the businesses which has the best practices on anti-corruption in different sector, different business association, so that, you know, like kind of incentive, you know, my colleagues at the Thai speaking about. But we're also talking about the, you know, a lot with the British ambassador and with IBNF Global about, you know, the list of the company that have a good practices on anti-corruption should be given priority in terms of, you know, land access, you know, credit, you know, all the things. So to ensure that, you know, despite of COVID-19, we continue our agenda on anti-corruption, that very important agenda for VCCI in general and for Vietnam Business Council for Sustainable Development in particular. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vinh. Nicolas, you have the floor for 2 minutes max.
Mathilde, you know, in your last question to me, you talked about the anti-corruption movement. And that's what we're talking about. We needed the Me Too movement to be able to combat sexism. We needed Black Lives Matter to address racism. We need the integrity movement. And our pledge in UNDP is to be part of and at the heart of the integrity movement. Companies which are engaged in with governments and corrupt practices will be called out and fail, just like companies which use forced labor or involved in anti-trafficking, or companies that use fossil fuels and pollute the environment. All those companies are of the past, and they will lose out. And governments that don't have enabling environments to go for greener, human rights compliant and growth with integrity, they will lose out too. They will lose out on trade deals. They will lose out on preferences. The future belongs to the businesses and the companies with integrity. And that's what the people will demand. And we see our role as in the midst of that, helping the big companies inspire the smaller and also incentivize the smaller and the investors, working with the governments, providing the tools and the training, and providing the platform where all these partners will come together and be part of the integrity movement.
Thank you very much. That's an excellent conclusion, I do think. So I really have to wrap up now. So thanks a lot to all of you for your contribution. I think we had an excellent discussion about what exists in terms of collective actions, how it's useful, not only useful, necessary, to create change, to change this the whole overall ecosystem for integrity. We had some sobering information about rising risk in corruption during the current crisis, but also a lot of very important elements of hope in terms of, the rising expectations from the public, from the investors. And as you say, Nicola, we might need the equivalent of a Me Too movement to make sure that we really create a culture of integrity at the company level, and that this question of integrity is really at the highest level of decision making in companies, are taken and discussed at board levels systematically. It's quite important. And another point that was made that is important is this idea of breaking silos between the different compliance issues and topics. Basically, what we need is responsible business conduct that is taken seriously at the highest level of companies, so that we can change really the ecosystem. So thank you again. For the SMEs that are in the audience, please use this self-evaluation tool that we have launched during this event. And at the OECD, we are very happy to support all the anti-corruption initiatives in Asia Pacific. And we are very happy to collaborate with all our partners. And we look forward to future collaboration with all the projects invited to today in this panel. And thank you very much for all your ideas and energy. And let's continue working together to tackle this quite amazing challenge of corruption and build up. Let's work together to build up integrity culture in the business sector. So with that, I leave you. Have a good day, good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are. And see you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.